Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about the Palazzo Rucellai, and this is work number 70. I'm going to attempt to switch back between the notes and the PowerPoint, and we'll see how I do with that. But let's break down a little bit about the identifiers first. So Palazzo, this term here, just means really palace. This is like the home of a very wealthy family in Italy. Rucellai is the family name. Okay, so all this means is it's the palace of the Rucellai family. This was built in Florence, Italy, and the architect is Leon Battista Alberti, who was a very famous architect I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. And this was around 1450 CE. Let's go to context first. So this was a home that was built by the Rucellai family, who were wealthy wool manufacturers within Florence. Alberti, the architect they selected, was a very well-known humanist. And so remember, one of the things that humanists really wanted to express was the past, especially the Greeks and the Romans, or the classical period. Alberti was really known as a scholar of architecture. In addition to designing things, he studied Roman architecture and attempted to revive it. He read writings from Roman architects, like he really immersed himself into it. He himself wrote a very famous book called On Architecture, which was a model for other Renaissance architects and other later architects about the important principles that he discovered in his study of classical architecture. And so what he tried to do was he took individual elements from Roman architecture and tried to bring it together or harmonize it. He's also trying to figure out how to bring classical elements, like things from the Greek and Roman time period, to a non-classical building. So like, how can we mesh these classical things with more modern architecture? He also was influenced by and probably even critiquing the Medici Palace, which was nearby, which I'll show you. You might remember when we studied the David, we talked about the Medici. The Medici were a very wealthy banking family in Florence. They were kind of like the unofficial rulers of Florence. And they built this huge palace, and then people started, like all the other wealthy people started building their own palaces, kind of modeled after they were influenced by it. All right, so let me go to some pictures to show you a little bit about this. So first of all, here's a quote from Alberti. He says, "Beauty is the adjustment of all parts proportionately so that one cannot add or subtract or change without impairing the harmony of the whole." This is very significant because what he's trying to do here in the Palazzo Rucellai is make like the perfect structure. So something that is totally harmonious, proportional, just like beautiful in all aspects, and very, very balanced. Okay, so here is the Palazzo Rucellai, and this is the facade of it. And we can see, let's just break down some stuff about form, and then I'll go back to the notes. We can see that it, at least from the outside, appears to be divided into 3 stories. So we have like 3 sections. Even if you don't know anything about architectural terms, you can look at the size of the stones. As we go from the bottom to the top, the stones get smaller. So there's larger stones at the bottom to give the building like a sense of weight. And there are smaller stones as we go up to the top. There's also kind of more added detail as we go up. Like everything down here is very square. Then we go into rounded arches and other decorations, which we'll talk about. This building actually has a hidden 4th story that you would not really notice that it has one. But if you were on the inside, there's actually another story up here that has no windows, which would have been used for the servants' quarters originally. So actually, let me show you this. So this is the Medici Palace, which is not far away in Florence from the Palazzo Rucellai. So you can see there's a lot of similarities here. This one was built first, but you can see it's divided into 3 stories. It has some arched windows. There's a lot of similar things. One of the critiques of this building is that although it had some classical elements, it was not beautiful or harmonious. It looks much more like a fortress than this one. Part of that is that these really like heavy, rough stones at the bottom make it look kind of just like chunky or clunky. Definitely not the look that Alberti was going for. Here's a comparison. So you can see the Palazzo Medici on the left and the Palazzo Rucellai on the right. I mean, a lot of similarities. And this is why people think that Alberti was probably critiquing the building of the Medici Palace and building his. I feel like he's almost saying, here's a better version of what you already made. Like kind of saying, here's what you should have done to make it look a lot better. And so there's a lot of similarities between them. Here's another example, the Palazzo Medici on the left, Palazzo Rucellai on the right. So he's definitely taking influence from that, but trying to follow these architectural principles that he's discovered that he feels like will make it even better. Okay, let's go back to our notes for a minute, and I'm going to go to form. So one of the things that the Palazzo Rucellai really does is it emphasizes horizontality. So when you look at this, yes, you look up, but it has these definite horizontal lines with the friezes, which we'll look at in a minute, that draw your eye in a horizontal direction. It has a 3-story facade that I said. It has a heavier bottom, bigger stones on the bottom to a lighter top with smaller stones. And then here's kind of the breakdown of how this home worked. So there's a hidden 4th floor called the attic. There were servants' quarters with no windows. And then if we start at the 1st floor of this home was used to conduct business. So the Rucellai family were wealthy manufacturers and merchants. So the bottom floor is where they would conduct their business. The 2nd floor is called the Piano Nobile, which is like the area where they would have guests or friends and like kind of the living room type area. The 3rd floor were the private apartments or like the bedrooms and the private rooms of the family. So just like we've looked at other structures in the past where they had somewhat of a separation between public and private, this is very similar. And as I go through here, if you want to pause this video to record stuff on your notebook, don't forget that you have that ability and you can do that. All right, let's examine the features of the building itself. So, one important thing to note is that it has 3 different types of columns, and you can see them here, but then you can also see a close-up over here. So on the ground floor, there are Tuscan columns, then Ionic, so you can see a little bit of scroll here, and then at the top, Corinthian. So there's a progression from Tuscan, Ionic, Corinthian. You might also remember that another very famous structure used similar columns or a similar order, which was the Colosseum. It went from Tuscan at the bottom, Ionic in the middle, Corinthian at the top. So again, he's just very interested in everything Roman and figuring out how to mesh that with the modern architecture of his day. Another thing that is very Roman is the arched windows that we see over and over here. This also has a classical entablature. Entablature, you might not remember that term, but it's like this section of the building that includes the friezes. We have a frieze here and a frieze here. Here you go, the word entablature. So that's a very Greek and Roman thing as well. He also is utilizing a type of engaged column called a pilaster. So these engaged columns that are squared off like this, and remember engaged column is when the column is connected to the background, those are called pilasters, which is another Roman element. He's also incorporating some symbols of the Rucellai family. So there's two important symbols of the Rucellai family that are on like their seal or their coat of arms kind of thing. One is a diamond ring, which is this part right here, with feathers coming out of it. So he has that on this frieze right above the ground floor or the first floor. Here's another detail of that. And then another symbol of the family is a sail blowing in the wind, like a sail from a boat. And he has that on the frieze above the second floor. On the bottom, there is a diamond pattern. And so this diamond pattern, a lot of art historians say that this kind of gives the building weight without it being so clunky like the Medici Palace. And then you can see there's also benches here. So these are benches incorporated into the facade of the building, but they would be like kind of for the public. So like say you're walking around and because I mean in Europe, even still today, people walk everywhere compared to America. And you want to just like take a little break, take a little rest. These benches kind of almost like give something back to the community, which is part of civic humanism, which the Renaissance was all about. So let me go back to our notes for a moment and let's go to content. So there's so much classical here. The pilasters, which are those squared off engaged columns, the rounded arches, the entablature and the friezes between levels, the 3 levels of columns similar to the Colosseum, the Rucellai family seal above the windows, and it's the diamond with feathers and the sail blowing in the wind. And then the benches on the ground level display that idea of civic humanism. And civic humanism we talked about at the beginning of this unit. But it's this idea that the humanists believe in education and intellectualism and all these things, but they think that you should use those things for the betterment of your society. So like become really educated, but then give back to your community. And so that's kind of like a nod to civic humanism by including those benches. The diamond pattern on the bottom gives everything a sense of weight, and everything is designed for harmony and balance. So he really wants to create the most perfect facade possible. And again, if we compare it to the Medici Palace, it definitely has like a lot more balance and harmony. It looks very proportional and beautiful. So again, if you want to pause the video here, feel free, and then I'll scroll down and you can get the rest of it if you need to. Okay, let's look at a few more things. So here's the close-up of that diamond pattern. Now, one interesting thing about this building is that it was never completed. So you see that the edge just like goes into another building. It's not complete. This is what the architect originally intended, and part of it remains unbuilt to this day. Here's the image of the courtyard inside. So it had kind of like a garden or peristyle for the family inside. So let's talk about the function. This was the home for the Rucellai family, and they definitely wanted to show off their wealth and power. I would also say Alberti, as the designer of this, is definitely making a statement on his own. So he's trying to harmonize classical elements to create a modern architecture that utilizes those classical elements. But he's also very interested in humanism and promoting civic humanism and just beauty in the world. So that's another part of civic humanism, is that these people that are very wealthy, using their wealth to help beautify their city and like enhance the place where they live for other people. So that is a summary of Palazzo Rucellai.